My guest this week is Dr. Steve Christie. He is a medical doctor, a lawyer, and a pro-choice activist turned pro-life. And his story, unpacked in this episode, his way of discussing abortion and the issues surrounding it, is incredible. He is probably the most articulate, compassionate, kind, thoughtful person I've ever heard speak on this topic. If you want to know how to defend life, if you're somebody who believes in pro-choice and want to know the argument on the other side, want to open your mind, your heart, your ears, and hear some good arguments on the other side, if you want to know how to provide those arguments to your pro-choice friends or family members or people that you encounter in the world, this is the discussion for you. It's charitable, it's thoughtful, it's compassionate, it's kind, it's based in science and logic, and reason and love. It's a great conversation. You're going to love it. I hope you do. And please share it with those who may benefit from hearing this. There's a lot of people out there, I think, who could hear this, who could learn a lot, and who could grow through hearing this discussion. It's a great one, friends. Please enjoy. Hey friends, welcome back to the show. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you're listening on podcast, please make sure you subscribe. Make sure you leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. And you can watch us also on youtube.com/The Cordial Catholic. If you're watching us there, thank you for watching. Please subscribe to that channel and give us a thumbs up, a like, hit the bell so you get notified when new videos come out each and every week. Thank you, friends, so much for watching and being part of this community. This week, a really good discussion. I'm joined by Dr. Stephen Christie. He is a physician specializing in oncological... Why did I even try and say that?
Oncologic radiology.
I saw the word and thought I shouldn't even try, and I tried. Oh, who even knows? He's also an attorney, member of the Florida Bar, and aside from his medical and legal work, he's also a lecturer on Catholic social issues, particularly marriage, family, and the dignity of life. He and his wife, Dr. Gracie Christie, live in the Miami area and are the proud parents of 5 children. Dr. Christie, thank you for being here. Welcome to the show. And hello.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me on. I'm really glad to be here.
I love to start off by butchering my guest's introduction. That's my favorite thing to do on this show, is to butcher one of those.
Fantastic.
I gotta say, I say a lot of theologically large words. You know, there's all kinds of words, epistemology, and these kinds of big words that we have to grapple with. I rarely am trying to pronounce medical words, so perhaps that's why I stumbled.
You're absolutely forgiving. I'll butcher a few today, I'm sure.
Okay, that sounds good. Just so we're on the same page. This is a serious discussion. It's a heavy discussion. It's a good discussion to have. It's an important one to have, and I do want to underscore the nature of that discussion. But I want to begin with a little bit of a wondering of mine, Steve. You know, because most parents wish for their children to grow up and have successful careers. Most think of, I want them to be a lawyer or a doctor. And I think you're just showing off, Steve. You're a lawyer and a doctor, so putting everyone else to shame and the dreams of their parents. So way to go.
Well, you know, jack of all trades, master of none. You got to be careful.
I think that's fantastic. Well, that does perfectly kind of poise you for a discussion on these kinds of topics, these kind of pro-life topics, the issue of abortion. And I'm curious to know, so I should have said in your introduction too, you are, of course, the author of the book we're here to talk about, Speaking for the Unborn, 30-second pro-life rebuttals to pro-choice arguments, out from Emmaus Road Publishing. That's what brought you on the show today. I should have mentioned that in your intro. You have, I think, an interesting journey and a lot of insights into this topic. So I want to begin there, if we can, Steve, with
Sure.
The journey that brought you to writing and thinking about these things, where you began, what got you to where you are now, because I think it's pretty interesting to put that together. Can you just
Sure.
Give us a little
So broad question. I'll give you a little background. So. Yeah. Usually when I do a lot of live speaking, and usually when I'm introduced, they say, you know, as a physician that I know science and embryology, and as a lawyer, I've studied the law and the Constitution. As a father of 5, I know a bit about babies and pregnancy, having not been, not pregnant myself, but I know a fair amount. As a husband of 25 years, I've come to, appreciate the difficulties of a woman balancing career with her family life. But but none of those are really my biggest credential for speaking on pro-life issues. What really makes me most qualified to speak, I think, on this issue is the fact that I spent the first 35 years of my life as a secular pro-choice liberal. So I know exactly what, why, and how the other side thinks about abortion. And having lived in both the pro-choice and now the pro-life worlds, I have a fairly unique vantage point from which to address the issues. I like to say that when I was pro-choice, I learned the arguments, but when I became pro-life, I learned the truth. And the book and the accompanying website, speakingfortheunborn.org, are the truth. So that's sort of a little bit about my background. How I got my story from how I got from pro-choice to pro-life is a sort of a long circuitous path. There, I butchered a word for you. But I mean, I could tell you if you're interested in the journey. So I grew up in a secular progressive household. My mother is a cultural Jew. My dad is Greek Orthodox. I was raised completely as an atheist. I had Santa Claus for Christmas. I had the Easter Bunny for Easter. And I had one day of Hanukkah because it got me a gift. So I was all for that. As I went through school, I went to a very secular progressive private high school where it was absolutely understood that if you were educated, if you were a thinking person, if you were sophisticated, you were obviously pro-choice. In fact, it was so obvious, nobody actually thought whether it's true or not. And conversely, the pro-lifers were clearly uneducated, backwards, intolerant, and probably Jesus freaks. And even so, I went to law school completely still in the pro-choice world. I even started medical school as a pro-choice person. And if you'd asked me why, I couldn't have articulated a reason. I might have said to you, I might have thrown down, one of these cliches, my body, my choice, or I might have said you're a misogynist or something. But I didn't have even an explanation for why I thought as I did. And what changed me, I guess, in a word, is the truth. And in medical school, you actually learn and study the facts about science and life and embryology, and you learn critically. Actually, you actually see and hold embryos and fetuses in your hands. And as Shakespeare says, the truth will out. And we learn there's actually a definition of life. And it's not a matter of philosophy or religion or politics, that what is alive, what is living, is a purely scientific question that science has fully answered. And it's spelled out in every embryology book and every biology textbook used at every medical school across the world. And I don't know if you want, there's actually a specific moment where my pro-choice world got rocked. So my wife, we actually met in medical school. And one evening I was in the anatomy lab late at night, and I was wandering around, and there's a room off the edge of the anatomy lab that nobody goes into. It's like a storage room. It's covered in dust. I had to find a light switch. I turned the light switch on, and there's extra desks and extra chairs in there. And I see a cabinet sort of askew off in the corner. And I walked toward the cabinet. I looked around the edge, and on shelves were jars of formaldehyde with babies in them in different ages of development. So we had embryos and fetuses in different stages. And clearly they had been discarded for years, covered in dust in this old room. And I was looking at them and looking at them and looking at them. And I became horrified at how irreverently they were being treated, having been discarded there. And it really horrified me. So the next day I hunted down our embryology professor, who was a really wonderful teacher. And I pulled her aside after class, and I confessed to her. I said, look, I saw this cabinet last night, and I was really disturbed by the irreverence that these babies were being treated. And I used the word babies. And she got agitated and irritated and angry and shook her finger at me and said, those are not babies. They were never babies. They were never alive, never alive, never alive. And we sort of froze and looked at each other. And I was reminded immediately of a line from Shakespeare. The lady doth protest too much. And I froze and she froze, and I knew absolutely at that moment, those were babies and they were alive at one point. And interestingly, I knew she knew it as well. And that was the big change for me. From there, I actually began an OBGYN residency for 2 years. And there, when you see, hold babies in your hands, when you actually study it, when women miscarry and you hold, their dying little babies in your hands, the truth is you can't deny the truth. The truth, the whole pro-life movement is based on facts, science, and truth. And when it's in your hands, there's no denying it. So that was sort of there were other steps along the way, but those were the big highlights and where I came from and where I now am.
That's a fantastic story, Steve. Wow, that really is. You can, and I appreciate the Shakespeare quote because that encapsulates that very well. You can feel in that moment that this professor of yours knew what you were saying was true, right? That doubling down on that denial. And I know that one of the points, and I want to get into this in a minute, on the strategy of your book is you're just looking at science, right? You're not necessarily even bringing in religious arguments into the sphere of pro-life arguments. You're looking at the science, and it's really getting through some of the science denial, in a sense, these mental gymnastics that is a lot of the work that you're doing in this kind of movement, right?
That's why it's very exciting for me. I'll back up for a second. So this is a Catholic show, and I'm a wacky Catholic who goes to mass every day. I was an atheist, but things change in life. And I try really hard to do a lot of apostolate with our faith, and it's very frustrating because you plant seeds and maybe you'll never see the fruits, or maybe the fruits will come 50 years from now, or 3 years, or never. So you really have to keep working hard, but it's frustrating. You don't see the fruits of your labor. That's not the case in the pro-life world. If you know your arguments and you've studied, the background materials you need to know, it is a shockingly winnable cause to be on, and it's very exciting to be on the side. Fact, science, and truth win out, almost every single time. Maybe twice in the last 3 years have I actually not gotten through to a pro-choice person. So it's really exciting to be on this cause. Really, really is exciting. They survive on, the pro-choice movement survives on cliches and rhetorical deception and ad hominem or personal attacks. And there's really nowhere to go on their side. And they're unable to articulate their views. And which is what actually led to this book for me, is I found that the pro-life side, we sort of knew abortion is wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong. And that's great to know, but that's not enough to sustain a movement. We need to know why abortion is wrong and be able to articulate to anybody who asks. And so I collected, over the course of a few years, the best of the arguments that I'd heard and the best of the rebuttals, and I'm sure you've heard most of them. And I sort of honed them, edited them, combined them, reworked them, and put them in a format that was user-friendly, that you could bring into discussions or debates. You would have sort of some bullet points in your brain so that you could actually use them in a meaningful way. And I think it's really, the book in that way is unique.
That's fantastic.
And really, in many ways, I'm more editor this book than author. And every argument that's pro-choice argument that's given, I give multiple rebuttals that you can use. And then I give the sources and citations where they're from, and additional reading if you want. So it's really, I think, a valuable and unique resource, in that it's so user friendly.
Absolutely, Steve. Absolutely. Okay, I want to ask you. The book has this chapter, this heading of why bother. Now, I'm thinking of places. I mean, I think that. Good news is that maybe this chapter is a little bit outdated already, because in the States we're already seeing movement in this area, which is great. I mean, great to have a book on this topic become slightly outdated, at least in that sense, because there is suddenly this movement in the States. And I don't want to date this show too much by putting it in time and space. I want it to be accessible even after whatever happens in the States eventually happens.
Sure.
Because there are places like up here in Canada, where I am, or say other places in Europe, United Kingdom, where there's lots of listeners, in Ireland, all around the world, in Japan, where we have a fan base, different places where people listen to this show, where this seems like the idea of abortion a settled topic. I'm thinking of here in Canada, where really the coverage of the abortion discussion in the States from a Canadian point of view is so one-sided from all of the national news outlets that you'd think that it's just a settled debate. Well, of course, abortion should be fully legal for women at all stages. These silly Americans even talking about this is just so silly. So for places where listeners like that might be coming from, where for us in this country and other places around the world, this seems like a non-issue. Like, abortion is fully legal, and different kind of restrictions, but it's fully legal. There seems to be no winds of change happening, no will of anybody in that country to change things. Why, in your opinion, should people who are pro-life, people who are like ourselves, why speak out in those cases when nothing seems like it ever could change?
Well, a couple of reasons. The pithy answer is there's 62 million reasons in the United States alone why you need to speak up. 62 million abortions since Roe v. Wade in 1973, and that's just U.S. statistics alone. And that's more than the populations of California and New York combined. Now, if what was being aborted isn't human, it's not alive, then it doesn't matter. But if those are human beings and alive, then we've killed, just in the U.S. alone, 62 million children. And that's why we have to be on this cause. The other exciting reason, as I alluded to before, is the pro-life movement has tremendous momentum right now in the United States. The press, you wouldn't know that by reading the press, but the fact is the laws are changing. If the leaked opinion from Dobbs in the United States Supreme Court holds, which most experts think it probably will, we're going to actually have had a sea change would have happened in this country, that abortion would not be federally illegal in the United States, but now it's no longer federally protected, so that it goes to the states. And we have probably in the United States around 26 states that will severely restrict abortion or prohibit it. Will probably be around 14 or so states that will allow it, probably up until the moment of birth, like California and New York. And in between 8 or 10 or 12, somewhere there are states that are somewhat unknown. So there is real legal momentum going on. And if you dig into the statistics, there's even momentum in people's minds that is shifting toward pro-life. And you can look at polls, and it depends how the polls are asked. But in the United States, for instance, it's about 75% of people from all political persuasions, and whether they're pro-choice or pro-life, are support a ban of abortion after 12 weeks, for example. And I'm an incrementalist, so I'm against all abortions. But if we get people to agree to no abortions after 12 weeks, that's a phenomenal start in the right direction. And then when that becomes ingrained in our brains and we understand why we made that move, then a few years down the road, we revisit that issue and bring it down to 6 weeks, and we bring it down to 4 weeks, so that when people understand the truth of abortion, so that we can force things down people's throats, but we really want to win people. We want to win their hearts and minds. We don't want to poke them in the eye and force them under threat of to that. So that's the approach we have, and that's the approach of the book. We talk a lot about strategy in the book before we even get to the arguments. We talk about where we speak, and we talk about how we speak, and then before we ever get into the what we speak. So, we talk about in the where we speak. There's the Ben Shapiros in the world that go into stadiums, and they fight it out in these crowds, and that's wonderful for those people, but that's not me. And there are congressmen and congresswomen that are in the legislatures that can make laws, and that's fantastic. And there's appellate court lawyers who are going to go to these appellate courts, the Supreme Court, and argue things, and that's great. But the rest of us have a role, and an important role, and that's in the everyday circumstances of our ordinary everyday lives. And that's me and you. That's with our friends and our families and our coworkers, one person at a time. Oh, and that's sort of the where. And then the book talks about the how, and that we always have to be, charitable, and we have to be intelligent, we have to be persuasive, articulate. That's why I make these things brief and 30 seconds long, these arguments. That's about the attention span of an average human being. We have to be mindful that probably 25% of the women that we're speaking with have already had an abortion, and they deserve our compassion and not our condemnation, because I speak for myself, but I'm sure you feel the same way. We've all made terrible mistakes in our lives, and these women, many of them suffer with guilt and shame, and so they deserve our compassion. And then I think one of the big key things that I've learned in this debate is we have to focus on winning hearts, and not winning arguments, and not sticking it to people, and not making gotcha arguments, because that's not winning anybody to your cause. So we always have to be winning people's hearts. And what I've learned, the words I'm looking for when I'm debating somebody or discussing with somebody is, it'd be great if I could say, this is my one argument, and they say, wow, Steve, I'm pro-life. Fantastic. Thanks for, that's not been my experience. But my experience is when you are clear, you're respectful, you're kind and intelligent, I very often hear something like this: Steve, that's interesting. That's really interesting. I'd never really thought about it that way before. And to me, that's the sound of the heart opening to the truth. And that's when things really change. And so for me, that's part of the excitement of the whole thing. Then when you have the where and you have the how and strategy, then you're ready for the actual words you use, which is the book itself and the art and the rebuttals.
I think that's so fantastic, Steve. And I love your section laying out that strategy of why you approach it in that particular way, right? Because again, you're not just trying to win an argument, you're not just trying to have the most pithy saying or score the most points. I appreciate your non-stadium lecturing approach.
You're right.
You're right. Like, and this is the same thing with debates on any kind of topic. Like, I mean, debates are good for solidifying why you believe something or hearing the other side, but they don't often, any kind of debate, really move a person from belief in one thing to belief in another thing. It's the hard work in the trenches, talking to a person one-on-one and kind of really knowing your stuff, but also knowing the person that you're talking to. I think underscoring for me the fact that you did, right, that is it 1 in 4 women may have had an abortion you're talking to. Like, that's a huge thing to understand as you approach that conversation, right?
Right, absolutely. And that's why we really have to be sensitive to every person you're speaking to. I've learned that if the person believes, and this is not strategy, this is real, this is Christian love. If the person you're speaking with believes you care about them when you're speaking to them, then they listen to you, and they're really open-minded and open to change. And I don't mean caring about them because you are being conniving because you want to win your argument. I mean really caring, willing the good of that other person for their sake. And I just again, when you couple that with the fact that our arguments are so persuasive that when they learn the truth hits really hard. I guess the only other thing I would add that I would add in terms of strategy is that everybody needs to find courage. My wife is a very, very well known in the pro-life movement, and she has enough courage for everybody. She's fierce. She backs down from nothing, and she doesn't need to be prepared for anything. Me, I'm not that way at all. My inclination is, let me write the book, I'll send it out, and then I'll hide in my closet. That's sort of the way I do things. And for you were kind enough to have me on your show here, but before I come on the show, I'm sweating and I'm nervous and I have to calm myself down and take some deep breaths because it's not my instinct to get out there to do these things. But we have to have courage, and 62 million children who can't speak need us to speak for them. So that's the other thing. Just that I always say, everybody, you have to muster a little bit of courage. And it doesn't mean to go into the stadiums. It means to talk with your brother who doesn't agree with you, to talk with your friend when the moment is right. But you have to get out of your comfort zone to do that. And I think that's just one more piece of strategy I think is really important.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. It's fantastic. I want to begin, I keep saying I want to begin, but I want to dig into these some of the actual arguments here. And the first one that I think a discussion, like if somebody, pops this up on YouTube and sees you and sees me, sees two white men talking about this conversation, the first often thing they might come out of their in their mind, out of their mouth might be, what are two men, right? Two white men talking about this topic. What right do we have to talk about this topic? What do you? I can think of all kinds of ways of beginning to address that. But where would you begin with a kind of a rebuttal right out of the gate, or a comment right out of the gate like that, Steve?
So there's three sorts of arguments that I hear a lot being a man, and the first one is the no uterus, no opinion. Who do you think you are, a man talking about women? Yeah. And I like to talk about social justice because social justice resonates with everybody on all sides. I tell them I always echo the words of Martin Luther King and Abraham Lincoln. I say that it would be both cowardly and immoral to permit yourself to be silenced on critical moral issues based on your skin color or your sex and your religion. And any arguments to the contrary are sexist and bigoted and racist. And I find that when people are accused of being sexist, bigoted, and racist, they tend to be quiet. And I can get you have quotes by Lincoln: to sin by silence when they should protest makes cowards of men. Or Martin Luther King says a man dies when he refuses to stand up for justice. So the idea that this is a human issue, this isn't a gender issue, that's the first set of arguments. The other argument I get is as a man I'm personally a misogynist, that I don't like women, I don't care about their health, that for some reason I have no regard for my wife's health, or two of my children are women, and I don't care about my daughters. And so I have a line that I use for that. When people say that I'm anti-woman, I tell them I'm not anti-woman, I'm just anti-killing. And since about this year, 300,000 baby girls will be killed in the US alone, My objection to that is fiercely pro-women. That's the second category arguments. And the third category I get every once in a while is that the actual movement itself, the pro-life movement, is a movement of men subjugating women, which is nonsense. And you could give them just a few statistics. And that first, men are less opposed in polling to abortion than women are. Two, the volunteers, the people actually active in the movement, the volunteers are almost exclusively women. If you go to a crisis pregnancy center, they're all staffed by women. And the leaders of every national pro-life group in America, I can't think of one exception, are all women. So this is a movement led by women that let me do some speaking, let me join their ranks. So the idea that this is just a movement of men subjugating women is nonsense. So those are the three arguments that I get as being a man. And you need to be, as a man, you need to be prepared for all three.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Steve. I guess one of the places that this discussion begins, I mean, that argument even has a leg to stand on, is the fact that the unborn are not seen as human, right? I think that probably is the crux of this. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but the crux of this discussion is the fact that these unborn persons are not seen as human, and therefore it becomes a women's health issue. It becomes an issue of, why can you speak to this? It's not an issue of killing; it's an issue of women's health, and this is not a human. It's something that's growing inside of them, or some such kind of argument like that. Is it safe to say that the crux is really the idea of the unborn being a person? Does that make sense?
They have a million arguments they throw at you,
right,
which are unscientific. They're usually personal attacks, or they're cliches. Reproductive justice. And I say to them, what do you mean by reproductive justice? And they just repeat it, reproductive justice. And I would say to them, do you know what justice is? Giving each person their due, that there's two people there. But if you start off with it's not alive, it's not a person, it's not a human, those again, and I talked about this before, that what's alive is not a philosophical question. It's not a religious question. It's not a political question. And it's a scientific question that science has fully answered. And it's an argument that the pro-choice movement lost years and years ago. So it's just a clump of cells. Or I read this week about medical abortions eliminating this is the newest one I heard, was pregnancy tissue. That was I think New York Times actually was pregnancy tissue, or Washington Post was pregnancy tissue. So these are false arguments, and you just need to be clear to them what the science is. One of my favorite studies came out about a year and a half ago. It's a survey done of over 1,000 worldwide medical institutions, and they have almost 6,000 biologists responded to a survey. And one of the main questions was, does human life begin at conception? And a full 96% agreed that life begins at conception. And what's really funny is the pro-choice movement was very upset about this. And they said this clearly is a biased study. And in fact, it is a biased study, but it's biased against the life side, because nearly 90% of these biologists self-describe themselves as liberal, self-describe themselves as pro-choice, and a majority describe themselves as being non-religious. So I always say, let's stick to the most basic scientific fact in this debate, and that life begins at conception. And when they say it's not a human, being human is not a matter of degrees. You're either human or you are not. And that thing growing in your uterus is not an eggplant, and it's not a bicycle. We know what it is. So again, I just come back to them with simple facts. There is really one there's a million arguments they make, and we refute all of them. So we can happily go through as many as you'd like. But the only real legitimate discussion in my mind, having done this a long time, the legitimate discussion has to do with balancing a woman's autonomy and bodily integrity versus the rights of the child within her uterus. And those are both legitimate issues to discuss. As men, we got to be careful talking about this, but I'm very big into my own bodily integrity and autonomy. And I feel very strongly about my wife's bodily integrity and autonomy, and my two daughters. But like everything else in life, there's a balance that we have to find. And, the right to swing your fist ends just before it hits my nose. So when somebody talks about the my body, my choice arguments, I agree where I can. And I tell them that I fully support the right of a woman to control and do what she wants to her own body. I just don't believe she has the right to do something harmful to another person's body. And a pregnancy involves at least two people, sometimes three, if there's a triplets or more. That's the my body part. And the my choice part is I agree where I can. And I say a woman should have the right to choose. The right that we're talking about is not to choose whether or not to kill her baby. It's to choose whether or not to have sex. And if she's going to choose to have sex with knowing there's a risk she may create a living human being inside her, then society has to ask that woman to endure that hardship for months, and a significant hardship, if the only alternative is killing a child. Because this is this balance issue, the balance of the burden on a woman in the end, and I don't say this lightly, is an issue of lifestyle. It's a burden on her lifestyle, and it's temporary. And the right, if we look at the right of the child, it's the right to not be killed. It's the actual right of life itself, and the right of lifestyle versus life. Life trumps lifestyle. So I always say I'm also very pro-choice. I believe in one less choice than the pro-choice movement. I believe you can choose abstinence, you can choose motherhood, you can choose adoption. You just can't choose to kill your child. So that's the discussion. I think the only one that really is a difficult one in a sense, with a logical conclusion, and that is that we have great respect for anybody's bodily integrity and autonomy, and we fully understand it. It's just not absolute, because life is complicated. Life is complicated in that regard.
Yeah, that's so well said, Dr. Christie. That's so well said. And I'm thinking too, this balancing act, and the fact that science really has moved past being able to say, well, this is my choice because it's my body, and this is a thing growing inside of me that has no consequence. Like, as you point out, study after study, these different surveys show that science, right, agrees with the pro-life movement, that this is a human being growing inside another human being, and that human being that has to have rights. It's not just a disease or a random organism or something that can just be removed at will. Right? We're not using religious arguments here.
Great point.
In these contexts, right? This is science. This is a living thing. And then once we establish that, we begin to grapple with what does that mean. But that really is like, I mean, that's hard to get around, right?
And you make a great point. I just recently, last week, re-listened to the Dobbs oral Supreme Court hearings, and Justice Sotomayor says, and she said, your decision that the unborn is alive, that's a religious position. And I don't know if it was an error on the part of the pro-life attorney, or a strategic decision, but he didn't say this is not a religious discussion at all. This is based on science, and it's accepted universally by all scientists. I was desperate for that to be said. Today, I read an article today, and I can't remember in which journal, but I read a journal today, again, making the straw man argument, saying that that the pro-life movement is imposing their religious views. And you can be an absolute fierce atheist, and you still should be pro-life. We're again based on science, which brings up another great point, and that is we have to be able to articulate these positions. And so when I started writing these rebuttals, and I was thinking to myself, as I started collecting them and putting them together, I kept on saying, well, why exactly am I? If I had to articulate why I was pro-life, what would I say? And I was sort of ineffective in my own mind. I had this point and this point, and I couldn't organize them. So it dawned on me that anybody who's pro-life should stop and ask themselves why they're pro-life. They should do the homework. If you need to do the homework, you can go to, for free, my website, speakingfortheunborn.org. There's a 4-part teaching video series. It's a total of 60 minutes that gives you all the information you need to know, the science, the law, the social justice issues, the abortion procedures, facts about Planned Parenthood, so that you can all the background materials. And then you should be able to write it down why you're pro-life. So I put together, and it's in the book, I put together my own summary of why I'm pro-life. It's called the 30-second pro-life summary of why you're pro-life. And I've learned it's funny for me, because I've learned the opportunity to defend the pro-life position it comes up commonly, quite frequently. And you might get one chance to make your case. And if you waste it, you might really miss that one opportunity you had. So if somebody says to me, and I get this every once in a while, because being a doctor, they'll say, somebody I'm kind of friendly with, but they don't know me well, and they find out I'm pro-life, and they're shocked, how can you be pro-life? So they say, you're pro-life? Wow, that surprises me. And then boom, I hit them with my 30-second summary, and I can tell you mine. I'm sure I'll butcher it. Well, now that we're on camera, but I say I'm pro-life, and I have my list. I say I'm pro-life because I'm pro-science, because there's overwhelming scientific consensus that life begins at conception. And I'm pro-life because social justice begins in the womb, because every living human being is entitled to the most fundamental of rights, that being life itself, because being a burden on someone is never justification for killing them. And I'm pro-life because I'm pro-woman, because abortion degrades women, treating their fertility as a defect and enabling men to use and abandon them at their most vulnerable. Abortion never empowers women, only the men who wish to exploit them. And I'm pro-life because I'm against violence, because abortion is not only immoral, but is an act of extreme violence against the most vulnerable. And I'm pro-life because of the visible evidence, because ultrasound and now MRI clearly reveal what's moving inside a woman's body, a living baby. And lastly, I'm pro-life because of objective morality. If abortion is the killing of a living unborn child, then it's both cowardly and immoral to remain silent. And that's why I'm pro-life. And then I always say, and why aren't you? And this is the answer I get 99% of the time. It goes like this. This is their answer. Nothing. They have nothing to say. But as I said before, so many people in the pro-life movement are not ready to articulate these very strong and convincing answers. So I really recommend, if you want it, it's free on my website, or you can buy the book at Amazon, Speaking for the Unborn. But prepare your own summary. Use mine, modify mine, but be ready to go, because these are exciting arguments, and they really, really convince people. So they're winning arguments.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you said before about the idea of science, representing science here, and a lot of the people who were addressing these conversations haven't actually thought this through. Like you mentioned that just now, right? You get this kind of blank stare, or this I don't know, because it's something that, especially in many places in the world where abortion is taken for granted, up here in Canada, for example, where every media outlet, with no exceptions, just reports this as the facts. Of course, abortion shouldn't be even discussed in our government, in our parliament. The air you breathe is this idea that, well, abortion is fine, this is a women's rights issue. But when you begin to push back with the science, as you're doing, Dr. Christie, you begin to, poke holes in that worldview, and those holes are pretty easy to poke because the science is pretty rock solid. And then you begin to get these questions, right? You begin to force people into thinking their position through, and realizing how untenable that position begins to be pretty quickly, right? What you've brought up is, and I had to think long and hard, how did we get to this position that you're explaining very articulately? How did we get to this position where abortion is just accepted, that we dismember living babies in the womb, and consider it somehow healthcare? And I thought long and hard, and the theory that I use, and when I do live presentations, I think of those monkeys, the see no evil, the hear no evil, and speak no evil. And if you go back to the sexual revolution, and I speak to the United States, I know you're Canada, but I'm sure it's a similar phenomenon. But back when I was a child, and the sexual revolution sought to unmoor sex from marriage and family, and they told society that sex was liberating and empowering and wonderful and completely without consequences. And as it turns out, there were some rather serious consequences, not the least of which was this surge in unwanted pregnancies. And it left those sexual revolutionaries two choices. They could say, wow, we messed up. This experiment backfired. We got to go back to traditional values. Or they could just sort of, get rid of those darn pregnancies. And we know exactly what they did, because sex and sexual expression and sexual, sexual fluidity now are the hallmarks of today's secular culture. And the only way to get rid of those those pregnancies, those unwanted pregnancies outside the safety net of marriage, was to pretend they don't exist. And that's where those three monkeys come in. I don't see a pregnancy. That's not a baby. That's clumps of cells. And that those, I don't hear that, my hand over my ears. I don't hear that fetal heartbeat. Now the New York Times, those are just embryonic pulsations. I didn't sit there denying, and we never speak the truth. Women go into Planned Parenthood, scared and frightened, pregnant, and the clinicians say, "Would you like us to restore your period?"
or testimony from abortionists in court actually says, when they describe what they do, is they empty the uterine cavity, rendering women unpregnant, because they can never, ever speak the truth. But if you can remove those blinds and remove those hands over the ears and remove and start speaking the truth, you can reverse this. And that's what we're seeing happening, because it takes a lot of work to live in that denial. Just like that embryology professor that I had, she had to yell at me, and she was yelling at herself. They're not alive. They're not alive. They're not alive. That was this. They're not alive. They're not alive. They're not alive. And we have to just persistently remove those blinds and that cotton from the ears, and to speak the truth. And that's how we liberate these people, and we get rid of this culture of death. And the other thing that we have to do, and this is a greater issue, and I'm sure this comes up all the time on your show and on religious issues, is we're in a culture now where everything is about the self. You got to find yourself, and you got to express yourself, and you got to be true to yourself, and you have to have lots of self-esteem, and you have to take selfies of your lunch, and share it with the world. But Christianity and traditional Judeo-Christian cultures also, we also believe in the self, but completely differently. It's about selflessness and self-sacrifice and self-control and self-restraint, and self-giving. It's about losing ourselves in the service of others. And if you start thinking that personal sovereignty, yourself is all that matters, and that anything that gets in the way has to be crushed, that's how you start killing your own children, because personal sovereignty, me, self is all that matters. And that's just a defective human anthropology. And I think we're starting to see, and I think it's a consequence of the pro-choice political, I can only speak to the United States really, but of the political movement of the pro-choice world is radical. And it's far more radical than the pro-choice population is in the United States. So we have states that are pushing hard for abortion for any reason, at any time, and taxpayer funded. But that's not even where the pro-choice movement stands. And the pro-choice movement even doesn't believe in abortion after 12 weeks. The latest two polls are 71% and 75%, I alluded to before. So I think this radical nature is collapsing back upon itself. So I think those things, those monkeys, the blind, deaf, and this never speaking the truth, and this notion of self, this defective human anthropology, I think we can turn it around. I think that's what's happening now. And if the Supreme Court rules that would just be a massive change.
Yeah,
bringing this. Although ironically, it's a massive change in the United States, but really at this point, that's why the book is exciting for me, because then the real work happens once it gets to the state level. We're not now relying on appellate attorneys to do the work for us. Now we got to roll up our sleeves and get to work state by state by state, convincing people one person at a time, winning hearts and minds one person at a time. And that's what this book does. And by the way, I used to be embarrassed about promoting the book as though I'm trying to sell something. I am trying to sell something, but I think the cause is wonderful. And just for the record, the publisher makes money. I don't take a dime for my work. It all put back into the pro-life movement. I won't accept even a reimbursement penny. And so please go buy the book. It's Amazon.com. I hope I'm allowed to plug it on your show here. I would say if you buy the book and you like it, give it a 5-star rating. That helps the selling algorithm. If you buy the book and you're not wild about it, please give it a 5-star rating. That helps the book. Or you can just get lots of parts of it for free at speakingfortheunborn.org. There, I had to plug it.
Oh, Steve, you're my favorite. I love it. That's fantastic. I think, what's so interesting up here, so from looking at a global perspective, I know you're in the States, so I'm thinking of globally, and most listeners to the show are in the States too, but there is a global dimension to listeners and viewers to this show. And I think of up here in Canada, the ramifications of this being a topic that's kind of back in the news in the States, that ripples out to the rest of the world, right? The States being what it is. It makes news there, it begins to ripple everywhere else. And suddenly this is back in the news up here in Canada. And even though our coverage is universally kind of, well, of course, the Americans are crazy, this issue is settled, this is a women's rights issue. Our Prime Minister is a self-described feminist. He talks about how this is a women's rights issue, and they actually want to kind of increase the right of access to abortion and shrine that even further than it is up here in Canada. But despite his inclinations, it being news in the States, and books like yours coming out to address these concerns, brings it back into the popular discussion all around the world. And like you said, there are hearts and minds then that we can, as we present these arguments to people, begin to move one person at a time, not winning stadiums, not winning the debate on the cable news network necessarily, but winning one person at a time, to begin to present that and begin to make the movement, move in that direction. I think that's really fascinating, that ripple effect and how that impacts, around the world like that. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And one of the things that I found, and we haven't talked about it yet, that, as you're describing the Canadian philosophy right now, that this really is a women's rights, and, they can't imagine that you would impose upon a woman's bodily integrity. But one of the things I have I on the website and in the book and particularly on the website, and I would encourage everybody for free to do this, is sometimes, we make these very clever arguments and maybe we change people's minds and their hearts, and that's wonderful. But sometimes you need to let the unborn speak for themselves. And so I purchased the rights to photographs and videos, and they're on the website. You can download them to your phone. And sometimes, instead of arguing with somebody, you can say, "Can I show you something?" So when somebody says, "Look, at 10 weeks is just a clump of cells. It's not a baby. Give me a break. It's just a clump of cells." And you could argue why it's not a clump of cells, and there's wonderful reasons I could explain why it's not a clump of cells. But you could just say, "Hey, can I ask you a favor? Can I just show you what a 10-week-old baby looks like? I just want to show you. And if you think it's a clump of cells, that's totally fine. But can I show you?" We have unbelievably beautiful images on our website, and download them to your phones and your computers, because sometimes that's all you need to do. I've had this experience where you say to somebody, "Do you mind if I just show you a photograph?" And you show them the photograph and they say this, "Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh." The other thing we have on the website, and you need to be careful how you do this, is we have animations, not videos, but animations of the 5 abortion procedures that are done. And if you've lived as those monkeys in denial, and you don't even know what an abortion is, and you think it's just this, as Planned Parenthood says, it's a safe medical procedure that ends up pregnancy. That's all it is. It's just a procedure that ends up pregnancy. You don't know the truth about it. You don't know how gruesome it is. At least learn the truth through an animation. The animations are edited down. They're made by Dr. Anthony Levatino, a former abortionist, and they are difficult to watch, even though they're animations, but they show the truth about abortion. They're not exaggerated. But when somebody's discussing with you about, first trimester D&C, a dilatation curettage, it's just a benign procedure. Again, you can argue with them. Or you can say, "Can I show you a 90-second animation? Do you mind?" And there's videos all over the internet of people watching Dr. Levatino's videos where somebody's saying, "Abortion is nothing, abortion is nothing." And then you watch them sobbing after they watch just an animation. So again, if you want to get to people's hearts, use the truth, and don't, no gotcha arguments, no fighting with them. Don't get hot under the collar, but be kind, compassionate, use your rebuttals that you have, but sometimes use those animations. One of the things we have is an ectopic pregnancy, an intraoperative video at only 8 weeks. And I would ask you to go to speakingfortheunborn.org and look at it. It's a beautiful video of a baby's head, nose, arms, ears, hands, feet, fingers, toes moving around. 8 weeks. This is no clump of cells. You can't help but say baby when you see that, and it breaks your heart. I don't care if you're pro-choice or pro-life, it breaks your heart when you see this video. And I put that in there because this baby who couldn't live has probably done more to save babies in this country than I could ever do. So sometimes let the unborn speak for themselves as well.
And I mean, those things, it's not, I mean, sensationalizing or a gotcha to show a picture or an animation. Like, okay, it's going to pull at heartstrings, but it's pulling at heartstrings because what they're seeing is what they thought they understood this to be, and seeing the reality of the actual, images that science can now produce and can show, and technology can now demonstrate. Look, this is the reality. I don't know what you thought this was, but here's what actually is happening. Here's what this actually looks like at this stage of development, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's going to tug at heartstrings, quote unquote, but by showing the truth, right?
Right. At the same time, you're still going to have to deal with the nonsense issues, the nonsense arguments, because people are so used to these cliches that they throw at you that you have to still be able to articulate why they are wrong. So whether it's, one of the classic ones we get all the time, and especially in the United States with our current president, is, we should never impose our personal beliefs on other people.
Yeah.
And I get that all the time. It's one of these cliches. You can't impose your morality. Who are you to impose your belief system, your morality, which is a nonsense issue. And I tell them, look, we all believe in imposing morality, and we all do it every single day on critical moral issues like rape and murder and theft and child abuse. We never rely on each person's individual moral code to decide what they should do. We declare to the world that those behaviors are repugnant, they're immoral, and if you do them, we're going to throw you in jail. So the idea that we don't impose morality is nonsense. We do it on every single person every single day. And I try not to get too political, but our current sitting president, who goes on and on about being devoutly Catholic, and I don't want to criticize somebody else's faith, but when you're in a position of speaking as you are for your faith in that sort of position, and when you say that I'm personally pro-choice, but who am I to impose it on other people? It's a nonsense argument that needs to be called out. And the classic argument that I've heard many times, and I've included in the book, is that's the equivalent of saying, I'm personally against slavery. I would never, never, never own a slave. But if you want a slave or two, that's, who am I to impose? You can have a slave or two, beat them if you want. I wouldn't beat my own slaves, but if you want slaves and you want to beat them, you can do that. These are nonsense arguments, but just like these important scientific arguments, we have to be able to deal with the nonsense arguments. And there's 50 of them, of the arguments they make that I've listed in the book, and whether it's this idea of imposing morality, or whether if a baby doesn't know they're being injured, then it's not immoral. So if they're not sentient, it doesn't matter. And again, you can deal with these arguments at any single point. I tell them it's the same thing as, if a young woman is passed out drunk from alcohol at a fraternity party and 3 men molest her, but she doesn't know it, does that make their actions moral? No, an immoral act is immoral, whether or not it's felt or whether they're aware of it. Or the arguments of it's best left to a doctor and the woman. And again, we talk about an immoral act cannot be made moral by the assistance of anybody. No more so than if the doctor just said to you, you might want to drown your 2-year-old baby. An immoral act is immoral, period. So you have to deal with these sort of, I don't want to call them useless arguments, but the ones that are not well thought out. So the autonomy arguments you have to be delicate with. These other ones you can really learn quickly and have your canned answer for. And there's other issues that are, again, you have to be very delicate. One of the ones, it's interesting, rape and incest account for less than 0.5% of abortions, but it's one of the first arguments I'm ever given. Yeah. And so on one hand, because it's such a tiny issue, you can really dispense with it quickly. But I always say to somebody, and in fact, I've been criticized in the book by a couple of people who wrote to me, and the second edition will fix this. And I like criticism because I want to get better. They said, that I didn't sound sensitive enough to the issue of rape in the book. And I went back and looked at my rebuttals, and I think they're right. And that when somebody brings up rape, yeah, maybe it's only 0.5%, but if the person bringing it up to you, maybe a person who experienced rape, an unimaginably violent act against somebody, that if it hasn't happened to me, or you can't possibly appreciate it. So we need to be very sensitive to that issue. So when somebody brings up rape as one of the arguments, the first thing I do is I make sure I'm very sensitive. Again, not to be conniving from a strategic standpoint, but from a Christian act of love and compassion, that the person I'm speaking to may be suffering terribly. So you have to approach that with real caution and kindness and tenderness. But then I point out that a couple of things. One, you point out that it's less than 0.5%, and we don't make general rules based on the rare exception. That's not how laws work. And one of the things I said, if your objection to abortion is based on rape and incest, then I say, congratulations. We agree. We're pro-life on 99.5% of cases together. And that's exciting. It's great to know they're pro-life if that's where they stand. And then if I can get to the issue, the crux of the issue in rape. But again, I'm very careful now about when I bring this up for somebody that may have experienced rape. As I said, there really are no situations in life when an act of terrible violence is ever fixed by another act of terrible violence. And a child is a child irrespective of how they were conceived. And it's always moving. If you ever go to the March for Life here in the United States, you'll have lots and lots of women who are holding signs saying, I was conceived by rape. And they feel their lives are justified, and they're very glad they're alive. And I have tremendous, tremendous respect for the mothers who endured that horrible act, but had the courage to not then bring the revenge out on that poor child.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, and an important point to make. Right? That is one of those things that is so often brought out when you talk about abortion, right? Even though it accounts for a very small percentage, right, or half a percentage, in fact, right? It's one of those things, one of those kind of outlying cases that seems to be brought out to kind of undo the entire thing. The other thing I'm thinking of is the idea that, like, society is best fit if these women just have abortions. Like, the unwanted babies and society are best fit. Why are we forcing women to raise their babies in a society where they can't afford to, or they can't take care of the babies? They'll just be in poverty and in unjust situations, and it would have been better off just having an abortion, and better off for the mother and the baby and for society. I hear that also brought out a lot from those who defend the right to access to abortion.
Right.
What do you make of that?
Yeah. So the best for it, that is best for unwanted babies or handicapped children. And there's a few things I say here, and I say that I tell them what they're saying. What they're telling me is that they think it's better to eliminate the sufferer than to eliminate the suffering. So if you think that we need to improve child welfare, I agree with you, and let's get together and do that now. And if you think that adoption services should be streamlined, let's do that, and let's do that now. If you think foster care programs need to be worked on, I agree with you, and let's do that together now. But solutions based on killing of innocent living human beings are never acceptable. It's never the compassionate and kind thing to dismember a living child in the womb. It never is. That's not the compassionate thing to do, is to kill a child ever. And when they talk about it with handicapped children, it's very, now you're talking eugenics, and I don't even like to talk about the people. There have been famous groups of people in the world and in our history that believe in eugenics, and you don't want to be associated with those groups of people. And the people that really don't like to hear those things are the parents of handicapped children who think their lives have been enriched tremendously, and their children deserve to live. And the last thing they think that their children deserve was not to be allowed to live. So I think those are really offensive arguments to make. What's interesting for me, and my wife and I disagree on this a little bit, is being on a Catholic show. I make a big point in this book, and I'm a wacky Catholic. I love being Catholic, but I say in the book and in the video series that avoid religious arguments against abortion, unless you're arguing with a religious person. And it's interesting for me, and this has just been my experience, the vast majority of abortion advocates are secular liberals who think that the religious, as I said before, are unsophisticated and unthinking and brainwashed and backwards and intolerant. So if you're debating abortion with a non-religious person, you've made 8 wonderful non-religious arguments, but then you happen to mention the word God or sin or sanctity of life or the catechism, you see their face change immediately. And you can read their mind, and their mind is saying something like this: oh, Steve, I didn't realize you're a freak. And every non-religious argument I just made just vanished. Right. I always say making a religious argument is handing a club to your opponent with which to beat you over the head. So we have so many compelling and persuasive non-religious arguments. I always say stick to them. But and my wife disagrees with me just a little bit on this, but that doesn't mean you don't bring your faith into this. As I told you, I'm a wacky Catholic. I love my faith, and it informs every single thing that I do. So I bring my faith deeply into my work. I just don't use the words of my faith to the people that I'm discussing with. So there's a priest that's very important in my life, who has a cute formula. I don't know where he got it. It's not exact, but he said, we tend to rush out and we want to do our debating. He says, but as Catholics, that's not what we do. The first thing we do is we stop and pray, and discern what we're supposed to do. And then once we've done that, in the tradition of our faith, make a sacrifice, offer it up. So you might this is deep in our Catholic tradition. So you pray, and then you might say, today I'm gonna discuss this with my best friend. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I'm gonna make a sacrifice on behalf. I'm offering it up, and I'm not gonna put sugar in my coffee today. A little something you do like that. Then, he always says it's 60% prayer and it's 35%. Sacrifice. And then with the little left over, that's your action. Yeah. So I say, don't bring your religious words into your argument, but certainly if you're a person of faith, bring your faith, whatever your faith is, into this argument. But again, my arguments are based on science. They're based on the law. They're based on social justice concerns, and they're based on the visible evidence and ethics. They are not based on religion at all.
Steve, very well said. This is a serious topic, of course, but you've been a fantastic guest to have on the show. I appreciate your perspective, how articulate you are. You're a great guy, Steve. I really appreciate your time on this show.
I'm grateful for you letting me on here, rambling. That's what I do.
Yeah. I was going to give you a chance now at the end to plug the book. You've already plugged it once, but you may as well plug it again. It's Speaking for the Unborn from Emmaus Road Press. Tell us more about the website and where people can go to get the book and the resources that tie into this.
Sure. You can get the book directly from the publisher at Emmaus Road Press, or you can get it from Amazon.com, Speaking for the Unborn. And if you get it, please give it a review, even just to hit the stars on there. That's very helpful to the algorithm. The website is speakingfortheunborn.org or .com. The website, everything on the website is completely free. And I shouldn't say this, but I've been doing this. This is something I feel very strongly in. If you want the book and you can't afford the book at all, and I've done this now for a bunch of people, including today, I went out to the post office and mailed 2 of them. You can reach me through the website, speakingfortheunborn.org, and I'll send you a book. I'll buy the book and I'll put the postage on it and mail it to you. I hope 3,000 people don't ask me today for a free book, but it's important to me. So I'm happy to put my money where my mouth is. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to spend time with you. It's been a great joy. And for anybody who wants to reach me, the website's a great way to reach out. Thank you.
Oh, geez. Steve, Dr. Christie, this has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I really appreciate your perspective and your take on this and the work that you're doing. I want to say God bless you, your wife, your family, as you guys do this really important work for not only the church, but for, humankind, for those who can't advocate for themselves. This is, such important work, and I really appreciate people like you being on the front lines of this, Dr. Christie. So thank you, and God bless you in that, and thank you so much for being here today with us.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful for the opportunity.